Every dispute holds two different sides. Every objective lens demands honesty. Knowing your fundamental rights, securing absolute justice.
Step away from the register now. We need to speak with you about your employment authorization.
I work here. I've worked here for 6 years. What is this about?
Are you a United States citizen?
Yes, I was born in Minnesota. Why are you asking me this here in front of
I
customers?
need to see documentation proving your citizenship and legal right to work. You need to come
This
with
is
us.
harassment.
The scanner froze mid-beep in her hand. 6 years at this register. 6 years of smiling at customers, folding receipts, asking about their day. And now, two federal agents stood between her and the line of shoppers pulling out their phones. The recessed lighting of Fashion Haven cast vibrant shadows across Register 4 that Friday evening. Security cameras captured every angle of what was about to unfold, where 27-year-old Aisha Fawaz was about to be detained by federal agents in front of her co-workers, her customers, and the watchful eyes of a surveillance system that would later become key evidence in an $11.4 million lawsuit. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Aisha Fawaz had been working at Fashion Haven since she was 21 years old. It was a trendy urban clothing store, the kind with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and curated seasonal displays, serving a diverse clientele in Minneapolis. She'd started as a stock clerk, worked her way up to cashier, then to senior cashier, managing the evening rush with efficiency and warmth. She was good at her job, reliable, friendly. Customers recognized her smile. She'd grown up in Lanesboro in a middle-class neighborhood where her mother worked as a community health educator and her father managed a small logistics company. Both were third-generation Somali Americans. She'd gone to public schools, played soccer in high school, graduated with decent grades but no scholarship money for college. Instead of going into debt, she'd moved to Minneapolis, found work at Fashion Haven, and built a life. She had her own apartment, she had a savings account and a retirement fund through her employer. She paid taxes, she voted. She was, in every legal and practical sense, an ordinary American going about her ordinary life. What no one knew, not her co-workers, not her manager, not even her parents, was that Aisha harbored a secret. For 3 years, she had been running an anonymous blog called Shadow Borders, documenting stories of immigration enforcement abuses shared by affected communities. She wore a discreet body camera during her shifts, originally intended to capture slice-of-life footage for context. It had become her insurance policy. That Friday in late autumn started like any other shift. Aisha clocked in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for the evening rush. The store was bustling. Weekend shoppers hunting for deals, teenagers trying on jackets, parents buying last-minute gifts. She took her position at Register 4, one of the main checkout lanes, and settled into the familiar rhythm of scanning items, making small talk, folding clothes with practiced precision. At 6:43 in the evening, everything changed. Two men in tactical vests moved through Fashion Haven's entrance with deliberate purpose. They passed the mannequins draped in autumn layers, the tables stacked with folded sweaters, the racks of distressed jeans catching light from overhead fixtures. Their eyes never wavered from Register 4. Aisha was midway through scanning a customer's stack of graphic tees when she noticed them. The first agent reached her register in seconds. The second positioned himself at an angle that blocked the adjacent checkout lane. No badges visible, no identification offered, just the vests and the expressions that brokered no argument. Step away from the register. We need to discuss your employment authorization. The scanner slipped slightly in her grip. Around her, the ambient noise of the store pop music from overhead speakers, the rustle of shopping bags, distant conversations seemed to compress into silence. The customer in front of her, a college-aged woman clutching her debit card, took a small step backward. Aisha's mind raced through possibilities. A mistake, a prank, a nightmare she'd wake from. But the fluorescent lights remained steady, the security camera in the corner continued its slow rotation, and the agent stood immovable. I work here. I've worked here for 6 years. What is this about? The first agent's expression didn't shift. Documentation. Now. We need to verify your citizenship and legal authorization to work. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Lanesboro, Minnesota. I can get my identification from my locker. Immediate documentation, not from a locker, here. The murmurs started then. Customers in line pulled out phones. A teenager near the fitting rooms angled her screen toward the confrontation. The second agent shifted his weight, a subtle movement that nevertheless conveyed containment. Aisha felt heat flood her face not from guilt, but from the sudden, crushing weight of public humiliation. Confusion tangled with indignation. She'd done nothing wrong. She paid her taxes. She had a birth certificate, a social security card, a passport somewhere in her apartment. But those documents were miles away, and these men were demanding proof she couldn't provide in this fluorescent-lit moment while strangers recorded her mortification. The store manager emerged from the back hallway at a near run. Elena Vargas was a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and 15 years of retail management etched into her posture. She navigated around a display of handbags and arrived at Register 4 with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts. What's going on here? Aisha has worked at this store for 6 years. She's one of our most reliable employees. What is this about? The first agent barely glanced at Elena. Federal matter. Employment verification. We need her to come with us. Elena's jaw tightened. You can't just take my employee without explanation. I need to see identification. I need to contact our corporate HR department. The agent produced a badge then, flipping it open with bureaucratic efficiency. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This is within our jurisdiction. A customer spoke up, a young woman still holding the jeans Aisha had been scanning moments before. This is harassment. She told you she's a citizen. Why are you doing this in front of everyone? Her voice carried across the store. Other shoppers paused. Employees from adjacent registers turned to watch. The situation was escalating, metastasizing from a private confrontation into a public spectacle. Then, a third voice cut through the tension. A woman in business attire, briefcase in hand, stepped forward from the growing crowd. She had the measured confidence of someone trained in courtroom confrontations. On what grounds are you detaining this woman? Do you have probable cause? Has she committed a crime? The first agent's expression finally shifted, annoyance flickering across his features. This is a federal investigation. We don't need to justify our actions to bystanders. The lawyer, because she was clearly a lawyer, held her ground. Unlawful seizure without probable cause violates the Fourth Amendment. If you're detaining her without evidence of wrongdoing, you're in violation of her constitutional rights. She reached into her briefcase, extracted a business card, and pressed it into Aisha's trembling hand. The motion was discreet, professional. Sophia Klein, attorney at law. Civil rights litigation. Aisha's mind fragmented into competing narratives. Part of her wanted to scream, to refuse, to demand they leave her alone. Part of her understood the futility of resistance. And buried beneath the fear and anger was another thought entirely. Her body camera was recording everything. Every word, every gesture, every violation. The confrontation stretched across 28 minutes. Elena made calls. The lawyer challenged procedural violations. Customers filmed, employees whispered. And through it all, the agents remained unmoved, their patience infinite, their authority absolute. Finally, the first agent delivered the ultimatum. You can come with us voluntarily, or we can place you in custody. Your choice. Aisha looked at the handcuffs visible on his belt. She looked at the phones recording her humiliation. She looked at Elena, at the lawyer, at the strangers bearing witness. And she understood that this was not a choice at all. I'll go with you. Just please don't handcuff me. Not here. The walk through Fashion Haven felt endless. Past the shoe displays, past the jewelry counter, past coworkers whose expressions ranged from shock to pity. The automatic doors opened onto the parking lot where an unmarked sedan waited, engine running. As they guided her into the back seat, Aisha's thoughts turned inward. The body camera pressed against her ribs. A small weight with enormous implications. This nightmare, her nightmare, would become evidence. It would fuel the blog she'd maintained in secret for 3 years. It would expose the system that had just swallowed her whole. The sedan pulled away from Fashion Haven's illuminated facade. Through the window, Aisha watched the store recede, the place where she'd built 6 years of ordinary American life, now the site of her very public unmaking. She'd grown up in Lanesboro with parents who believed in education, community involvement, and the promise that hard work would protect you. She'd chosen financial stability over college debt, moved to Minneapolis, built a careful existence of rent payments and retirement contributions and Sunday dinners with friends. She'd believed in the system's fairness, even as she documented its failures on shadow borders. Now the system had turned on her. And somewhere in the irony, in the cruel symmetry of a blogger detained by the very institution she'd been chronicling, Aisha felt a strange, terrible clarity. This would not break her. This would fuel her. The detention facility waited ahead, fluorescent and anonymous against the darkening sky. The federal detention facility materialized as a low-slung concrete structure surrounded by chain link and razor wire, unremarkable in its brutality. Aisha was escorted through a side entrance where the procedural machinery of immigration enforcement began its work. Fingerprinting first. Her hands pressed against the digital scanner, each finger rolled with mechanical precision by a uniformed officer who never met her eyes. Then, photographs, front, profile, three-quarter, the camera flash washing out her features into data points. Her belongings were cataloged and confiscated: phone, wallet, keys, the Fashion Haven employee badge she'd worn for 6 years. The badge was examined with particular scrutiny, then dismissed as inadequate proof of anything meaningful. The body camera remained undetected, concealed beneath her work shirt. Its battery would last another 18 hours. She was processed like the undocumented immigrants she'd written about on shadow borders, stripped of identity, reduced to a case number, shuttled through corridors, painted institutional beige. No one asked about her birth certificate. No one seemed interested in verification, only documentation of her detention. The cell was stark: cinder block walls, a metal bench, a toilet without privacy, the overhead light never dimmed. Aisha shared the space with another woman, a Somali immigrant in her 50s, who'd been held for 11 days pending deportation proceedings. The woman spoke in careful English, her accent carrying the weight of displacement. She described the abuses Aisha had chronicled anonymously for years: indefinite holds without hearings, medical neglect, families separated without notice. Each story was a variation on a theme: bureaucratic cruelty disguised as procedural necessity. Aisha listened and memorized, her blogger's instinct activated even in captivity. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 years documenting these injustices from a safe distance. Now she was living them. Hours passed with glacial slowness. No clock, no windows, just the fluorescent hum and the occasional shuffle of guards in the hallway. Finally, near midnight, a guard appeared and informed her she had a phone call. The phone was mounted in a small room under more surveillance cameras. Aisha's hands shook as she dialed her mother's number, the digits muscle memory from childhood. Her mother answered on the second ring, voice tight with fear that fractured into relief at the sound of Aisha's voice. The conversation was brief, urgent. Her mother and father would drive from Lanesboro immediately. They would bring every document: birth certificate, social security card, passport, school records. They would fix this. Aisha heard the unspoken question beneath her mother's words. How could this happen to you? How could this happen to us? She had no answer. Her parents arrived at the facility before dawn, documents in hand. They were turned away at the reception desk. Protocol required submission through official channels. The birth certificate that could confirm Aisha's citizenship in minutes was rejected in favor of a verification process that crawled through layers of bureaucracy at a pace designed to punish rather than resolve. Aisha learned this secondhand from a guard who delivered the news with administrative indifference. Her parents were instructed to leave the documents and go home. Processing would take time. How much time? Impossible to say. The weight of the system settled over her like sediment. She understood then what her blog followers had been trying to articulate for years. The process was the punishment. The detention itself was the deterrent. Truth was irrelevant when procedure could substitute for justice. In the cell, as her Somali cellmate slept fitfully on the metal bench, Aisha reflected on the terrible symmetry of her situation. Shadow borders had been her attempt to give voice to the voiceless, to document what institutions wanted hidden. She'd maintained anonymity to protect herself from retaliation, never imagining the retaliation would come anyway. Have you ever felt the weight of hidden truths in the face of injustice? Share in the comments if you've witnessed similar overreach, or why stories like this need to be amplified. The blog had started 3 years ago after a community gathering where Somali elders shared stories of ICE raids at workplaces, homes, mosques. Her third-generation heritage connected her to these narratives in ways that felt both intimate and distant. She'd been born in America, spoke English without accent, navigated spaces where her citizenship was never questioned until it was. Shadow Borders became her digital archive, anonymous accounts, encrypted submissions, stories compiled from across the country, each one a thread in a larger tapestry of enforcement gone awry. She'd worn the body camera as insurance, never expecting to need it for her own protection. While Aisha endured her second night of detention, events outside the facility accelerated. Sophia Klein, the lawyer from Fashion Haven who'd pressed her business card into Aisha's hand, received a call from Aisha's parents. They'd found the card in their daughter's belongings, a lifeline in bureaucratic darkness. Sophia listened to their story and felt recognition flicker. The details matched patterns she'd been tracking, patterns eerily similar to cases documented on a blog she followed religiously. Shadow Borders. Anonymous. Meticulous. Urgent. She took the case pro bono and began drafting an emergency habeas corpus petition. The legal argument was straightforward. Aisha Fawaz was being held without probable cause, denied due process, subjected to unlawful seizure based on nothing more than the color of her skin and the assumptions about her heritage. The Fashion Haven security footage provided visual evidence. The body camera audio, which Aisha's parents mentioned existed, would provide even more. By the second day of Aisha's detention, the story had metastasized online. Customer videos from Fashion Haven circulated across social media platforms. #Justice for Aisha began trending. Civil rights organizations issued statements. Local news picked up the story. And somewhere in the digital noise, Shadow Borders' anonymous followers began drawing connections between this detention and the patterns their favorite blogger had been documenting for years. The irony compounded. Aisha's detention was creating the exact kind of story she would have covered on her blog, and her followers, unknowing, were amplifying her own case. 54 hours after her detention began, Sophia Klein's emergency petition reached Judge Amelia Thornton's desk. The judge reviewed the evidence security footage, witness statements, documentation of Aisha's citizenship that had been available within 10 hours of her detention but ignored for 2 days. The hearing was swift and devastating for the government. Judge Thornton's voice carried the weight of institutional rebuke as she cataloged the violations: unlawful seizure, denial of due process, bureaucratic obstruction disguised as procedure. She ordered Aisha's immediate release with transportation provided back to Minneapolis. When the cell door opened and Aisha was told she was free to go, she felt something crack open inside her, not relief exactly, but a kind of terrible clarity. She'd been vindicated, but vindication didn't erase the 54 hours of degradation, the public humiliation, the knowledge that citizenship hadn't protected her when it mattered most. She walked out of the detention facility into afternoon sunlight where her parents waited, flanked by Sophia Klein and a small gathering of supporters who'd organized online. Media cameras captured her emergence still wearing her Fashion Haven uniform, rumpled and exhausted, but unbroken. The story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The reunion in the detention facility parking lot lasted only minutes before the cameras and questions overwhelmed them. Aisha's father guided her into their car with protective urgency while Sophia Klein fielded media inquiries with practiced deflection. They would have no comment at this time. Miss Fawaz needed rest and medical evaluation. Further statements would follow. But Aisha's mind was already moving forward, past exhaustion towards something harder and more deliberate. Vindication was temporary. Justice required action. And she understood, with the clarity that comes from having survived systemic violation, that her detention was not an aberration, but a symptom. 3 months later, Sophia Klein filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit against Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security, and the 2 agents who had detained Aisha at Fashion Haven. The complaint alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unlawful search and seizure, the Fifth Amendment's guarantee of due process, and the 14th Amendment's promise of equal protection under the law. The legal theory was straightforward. Aisha had been targeted based solely on racial profiling, detained without probable cause, and subjected to a verification process designed to punish rather than resolve. The evidence was overwhelming. Discovery began, and with it came revelations that transformed Aisha's personal nightmare into something larger. The anonymous tip that had supposedly prompted the raid at Fashion Haven turned out to be fabricated. An internal ICE email chain uncovered through court-ordered disclosure revealed the truth. An agent within the department had suspected Aisha was the anonymous blogger behind Shadowboarders. The blog had become increasingly problematic for enforcement officials. Its documentation of abuses was too detailed, too accurate, too damaging. The agent had crafted the fake tip as pretext for detention, hoping either to silence her through intimidation or to find evidence linking her to the blog during processing. The strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing Aisha, the detention had provided her with first-hand evidence of the very abuses she'd been documenting. Her body camera footage, 54 hours of audio capturing everything from the initial confrontation to conversations with her cellmate to bureaucratic indifference from guards, became devastating evidence not just for her case, for the broader pattern of enforcement misconduct. The discovery also revealed statistical evidence that Sophia's legal team had been compiling for months. ICE workplace raids in Minneapolis disproportionately targeted establishments employing Somali American workers. Of 43 raids conducted over 18 months, 31 had occurred at businesses with significant Somali American staff, despite those businesses representing only 12% of the city's employers. The pattern was clear. Enforcement wasn't about immigration status. It was about ethnic targeting disguised as immigration enforcement. The trial consumed 4 weeks in federal court. Aisha sat through testimony from the agents who detained her, watching them attempt to justify the unjustifiable. They claimed the anonymous tip had seemed credible. They insisted they'd followed protocol. They suggested that Aisha's reluctance to immediately prove her citizenship had raised reasonable suspicion. Sophia dismantled each claim with precision. The tip had been fabricated by their own colleague. Protocol required probable cause, which they couldn't demonstrate. And Aisha's assertion of her rights, her refusal to be humiliated further without legal representation, was not evidence of wrongdoing, but of citizenship exercised. The jury watched the combined footage repeatedly. Fashion Haven's security cameras capturing the public confrontation, Aisha's body camera audio revealing the private degradations that followed. They heard Aisha's testimony about the panic attacks that now accompanied any interaction with law enforcement, the therapy sessions needed to process the trauma, the way customers at Fashion Haven had initially avoided her register after her return, as if detention were contagious. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological toll of racial profiling, the compounding trauma of being targeted within one's own country, the particular wound of citizenship betrayed. The defense attempted to argue qualified immunity, suggesting the agents had acted in good faith based on information available to them. But the fabricated tip undermined that defense entirely. There had been no good faith. There had been ethnic targeting and bureaucratic retaliation. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, liable on all counts. The damages award reflected both compensation and condemnation. $2.4 million for Aisha's trauma, lost wages, and ongoing psychological treatment. $9 million in punitive damages designed to deter future misconduct. $11.4 million total. The courtroom erupted in restrained celebration. Aisha sat motionless, feeling the weight of vindication settle over her like a second skin. The number was staggering, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the message. The aftermath unfolded across months. The two agents were terminated. Internal investigations were launched into the colleague who'd fabricated the tip, revealing a pattern of misconduct that led to criminal charges. The Department of Homeland Security implemented reforms, mandatory documentation of probable cause before workplace raids, 10-hour maximum holds for citizenship verification, and independent oversight of enforcement actions targeting specific ethnic communities. Aisha used her settlement to support her family, donate substantial sums to immigrant rights organizations, and, most significantly, to reveal her identity as the creator of Shadowboarders. The revelation came at a press conference organized by civil rights coalitions. Aisha stood before cameras and acknowledged what many had already suspected. She was the anonymous blogger who'd been documenting ICE abuses for 3 years. Her detention hadn't silenced her. It had vindicated her. Shadowboarders transitioned from anonymous blog to public advocacy platform. Aisha became its public face, speaking at conferences and universities about the intersection of citizenship, racial profiling, and enforcement overreach. She emphasized resilience, not as abstract inspiration, but as practiced resistance, the daily choice to continue documenting, to continue demanding accountability, to continue believing that truth could outlast institutional power. She returned to Fashion Haven 6 months after the trial, not as a cashier, but as assistant manager. The promotion was Elena Vargas's idea, a gesture of solidarity and recognition. Customers who'd witnessed her detention now approached with support rather than avoidance. The store became, improbably, a symbol of resistance, the place where a citizen had been unlawfully detained and then, through evidence and advocacy, had exposed a system's failures. The story concluded not with neat resolution, but with ongoing commitment. Aisha appeared at a national reform conference 1 year after her detention, addressing an audience of advocates, lawyers, and affected community members. She spoke about her hidden voice becoming public, about the cost of whistleblowing, about the necessity of documentation in an era of enforcement excess. She challenged the audience to question what belonging meant when citizenship alone couldn't protect against profiling. She urged protection for those who documented abuses, whether anonymously or publicly. And she left them with the evidence of her own transformation, from cashier to captive to catalyst. The legacy wasn't just the $11.4 million or the policy reforms or even the agents held accountable. The legacy was the question she posed to power. How many others had been detained without cameras recording? How many stories remained untold? Shadow Borders would continue documenting those stories, but now, with Aisha's face and name attached, the blog carried a different kind of authority, not anonymous testimony, but witness truth, backed by a verdict that confirmed what communities had been saying for years. The system could target citizens, it could detain without cause, it could rely on racial assumptions disguised as enforcement protocol, but it could also be held accountable. Justice was possible. Not inevitable, but possible. And that possibility, hard-won and expensive, was worth fighting for.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Transparency is an ongoing commitment, and education provides your greatest safeguard. Thank you for watching and empowering a truthful world.